The Shark Deck.
Hello there, I'm Johnny Mac. Did you see Tucker Carlson was fired by Fox? Seth Meyers joked it'd be funny if the network replaced him with the new green M&M. Fox really knows how to disappear someone. I'm shocked they didn't just go with this as their statement. Tucker Carlson is not now and has never been employed by this network. We don't know who that is, and we've never even heard the name. Tune in tonight at 8 p.m. for our nightly newscast hosted, as always, by Fox News' white blonde lady blue dress. James Corden, who, by the way, tonight is the last Late Late Show with James Corden. There's no buzz on this. He got a little press for a carpool karaoke, but there's not a zillion articles about the great James Corden era. It's very strange. This is not like your usual late night wrap up. I guess the most recent one was Trevor Noah leaving The Daily Show. And there were tons of articles about Trevor, but there's almost nothing about Corden. Anyway, Corden had a Tucker Carlson joke, which was Tucker Carlson has now worked at and left MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. He's running out of options now. Soon he's just going to be on the Weather Channel saying that hurricanes are caused by drag queens. Good joke, James. I was traveling the past few days, so I have not yet had an opportunity to watch John Mulaney's special. However, I'm going to cover it extensively. I'll do it in the second half of the show because there will be many spoilers, okay? So after the break, I'll do a lot of Mulaney, and I will warn you in advance. A lot of Pete Davidson news. Pete will host Saturday Night Live in about 10 days. Page 6 says that Pete has decided not to take any jabs at Kim Kardashian. A source tells Page 6 that Pete will be a good sport about his love life, and he's being a gentleman when it comes to Kim. However, a different insider tells Page 6 that they won't be surprised if a Kardashian bit does make it into the show, saying, nothing's been written yet, but no, with Pete, nothing is off the table. Meanwhile, Pete was out at Madison Square Garden enjoying the Knicks game, and TMZ has a video of Pete getting in a little mix-up with a fan. As TMZ writes, you see Pete appears to pose for a pic with one dude in a pink shirt and a blue cap, and he keeps moving through the crowd, but it clearly wasn't enough for the fan, who continued to follow Pete, putting his arm around Pete Davidson and resting his head on Pete's shoulder. Pete tries to stay cool, taking more pics, and then the overzealous fan continued to do stuff, and then Pete shoves the guy away and tells him to back off. But there's even more Pete Davidson news. Remember he had that late-night car crash a while back? It seems that the Beverly Hills Police Department has recently wrapped up its investigation. You may recall, Pete was driving through Beverly Hills last month. He lost control of his Mercedes, drove through someone's yard, and crashed into the side of their house. No one was injured. TMZ points out the case is headed to the district attorney, which usually handles felony cases, but in Beverly Hills, the DA also can handle misdemeanor charges. We'll keep an eye on that. Congratulations, Nate Bargatze. He now holds the record as Amazon's most streamed original comedy special in its first 28 days of viewership. You got that good. According to Nielsen, 2.9 million total viewers have watched Nate Bargatze's Hello World. Nate Bargatze's Hello World is currently ranked number 2 on the Johnny Mac Best of 2023. Number 1 is Kyle Kinane. In case you're wondering, you'll find Kyle's on YouTube. The 2.9 million viewers is nearly 500,000 viewers above Jim Gaffigan's 2019 special Quality Time, which now sits in second place with an audience of 2.5 million in its first 28 days. Nielsen points out Hello World was also the top comedy special across all streaming platforms for the month of February, with about 2.6 million viewers. Bob Newhart's wife, Ginny, has passed away. They were married 60 years. The family put out a statement saying she was our rock and we will miss her terribly. Bob Newhart is 93. Ginny was 82. They were introduced by their mutual friend, Buddy Hackett. Back in 2019, Bob Newhart told People, Buddy said, I've got a girl for you. She was going with another guy, but I don't think it's right for her, so I'm going to fix you up on a blind date. You'll meet her and you'll date and you'll get married. Then you'll have kids and you'll call one of the kids Buddy, which we did. Great story there. I saw several headlines along the lines of this headline, which comes from Egypt News. The headline, Egyptian comedian Bassem Youssef slams Kevin Hart, Afrocentric movement for cultural appropriation and Cleopatra backlash. And I was like, okay, so you can immediately react and be like, Bassem Youssef went after Kevin Hart, and then you can have your various take on the issues. I thought what would be best here is let's take a listen to what Bassem Youssef actually said.
It's not about black and white. It's about the continuous culture appropriation and falsification of history that has been done by what the so-called Afrocentrist movement. The Afrocentric movement started the last century as a way, in a good intention, to teach African American about their rich history of West Africa, the great empire of Benin, of Ghana, of Songhali, the great empire of Mali. But the thing is, that's why you find people like Kevin Hart, who subscribes to these theories, who claim that his ancestors built the pyramids. I'm sorry, your ancestors had their own wonderful civilization in West Africa. They are culture appropriating my culture, calling the people of Egypt of today, despite their skin tone, that they call us as invaders, they call us as intruders, and they are being erased from our own history.
And the clip fades out there. The other man you heard interjecting is Piers Morgan, which is where the interview took place. I'm not sure what Piers said or what happened after, but that's what Bassem Youssef said. Big Mouth has been renewed for an 8th and final season. Series star Nick Kroll said, if you had told adolescent Nick Kroll and Andrew Goldberg that middle school would take 8 years to finish, they would have been like, yeah, that sounds about right. This seems like it'll never end. Deadline says Big Mouth and its spin-off have racked up more than 1 billion viewing hours, and according to Netflix, has included 689 masturbation jokes. Do you like Jaws? Maybe you will like to go see The Shark is Broken. The Shark is Broken will arrive on Broadway this summer. Co-writer Ian Shaw plays his father Robert Shaw. In the movie Jaws, Robert Shaw played Quint. The Shark is Broken begins a 16-week limited engagement Tuesday, July 25th at the John Golden Theater. Official opening Thursday, August 10th. And by the way, The Shark is Broken is unrelated to a different stage musical based on Jaws, which is called Bruce. Bruce received its world premiere at the Seattle Rep last year. Richard Pryor's first 2 albums are to be re-released as newly remastered vinyl LPs. I remember when I first started at Sirius Satellite Radio, my boss one day asked me why we didn't play a lot of Richard Pryor. The answer back then, 20 years ago, was because the albums sounded like garbage, and when you played them on a satellite radio, you couldn't even hear them. Over time, the Richard Pryor albums were remastered. There's a really good box set with a red cover. Those sounded really good, and then we played plenty of Richard Pryor. The self-titled Richard Pryor album and another album called Craps After Hours will be released on vinyl. So will Live at the Comedy Store 1973. Pryor released his first self-titled album back in 1968. He was starting to change his style from a Bill Cosby-ish kind of comedian to the Richard Pryor you think of in your mind. Scott Saul is the author of Becoming Richard Pryor. He wrote in the liner notes, "What you hold in your hands is something precious." Both the landmark debut that was and the piece of cultural dynamite that might have been in its original form, Richard Pryor the album, alerted the world that Richard Pryor had stepped out of Bill Cosby's long shadow and developed a style, surreal, nervy, improvisational, that was all his own. Sides 1 and 2 are the original, but the newly remastered album has sides 3 and 4 offering bonus material recorded at the same time. That's neat. The other album, Craps After Hours, also released as a double disc. All this will be available Tuesday, May 23rd. Speaking of Richard Pryor, Tommy Davidson and Mike Tyson were on a podcast, and they were asked who is the most influential comedian. Tommy Davidson said Richard Pryor was the one because he had versatility. He can do characters, and he can talk about them without you knowing that he was talking about them. He could talk about racism, he could talk about sexism, and he could talk about all those things, but he puts it in such a comedy context. Mike Tyson said, yeah, I know, but listen, I think Eddie is the greatest. I presume he means Eddie Murphy there, not, Eddie Pepitone. I think Eddie is the greatest. He was the greatest. I know all that insecurities, all these great acts now, and if you go on stage, the greatest comedians in the world will be right there staring at him. I am of a certain age, and if you are my age, you loved Eddie Murphy. But over time, as I became more educated about this, Eddie Murphy wearing the red suit, the voice acting he does in his bits, clearly influenced by Richard Pryor. So there's just no scenario where I can say Eddie Murphy's better than Richard Pryor. That would be saying like the Black Crowes are better than the Rolling Stones. You just can't do it. Longtime listeners of the podcast know that Idaho is a bastion of comedy. Idaho, of course, the home of Ryan Hamilton. Well, Idaho has announced some of the acts for the Eastern Idaho State Fair. No, Ryan Hamilton's not playing it, but Jim Gaffigan will be there. So will Incubus and Walker Hayes. Unfortunately, Incubus and Jim Gaffigan is not one bill. That would be amazing. Incubus plays September 1st, Jim Gaffigan September 7th. So you can't even see the two of them back to back. Other entertainment at the fair includes the Gem State Classic Pro Rodeo, Bull Riding Championships, National Indian Relay Championship, tractor pulls, and the Demolition Derby. One of the organizers says the Demolition Derby celebrates its 50th anniversary with the Eastern Idaho State Fair. You can't beat the action, and you can't beat the smell. Last year, you might remember we had a streaker.
Hello, I am Mark Francis, host of Palace Intrigue, the podcast that delves into the daily drama of the British royal family. These short daily episodes cover the latest news and scandals involving the likes of Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, Kate Middleton, King Charles, and the rest. From backroom sources to public controversies, we've got you covered. Whether you're a long-time fan or just curious about the royals, Palace Intrigue is the perfect podcast for you. So join us as we explore the lives, legacies, and dramas of the British monarchy. Subscribe now and never miss an episode of Palace Intrigue.
The remainder of the podcast will discuss John Mulaney's new special, Baby J. I will share some of the actual jokes from the special, so massive spoilers coming up. After Mulaney, I'll talk about the Sydney Comedy Festival. So if you don't want to be spoiled, it's a good time to check out, and I will see you tomorrow. Some Mulaney spoilers coming up in 3, 2, 1. The New York Times writes, in a glamorous, swirling shot orchestrated by the theater director Alex Timbers, the camera gives the comic what he needs. It retreats to reveal John Mulaney, 40, in a maroon suit, before circling to give us a picture of the commanding power of stardom. Shot from behind, we see his perspective, a hazy mass of people underneath chandeliers in between an ominous series of statues inside the Symphony Hall in Boston. How about that, huh? They write, it's a striking image, setting up a series of bristling comic vignettes that dig into Mulaney's drug addiction, intervention by friends, and stint in rehab. One is tempted to say it's his most personal work, but that isn't quite right. The first shot tips us off to a theme. You can be invisible in front of a crowd. Let me jump in here. So I mentioned earlier, I was traveling earlier in the week, and this week at night, I have events with the family every night. So I don't know if I'm going to get to Mulaney until Sunday. I want to watch it. The headline here is the reviews are very strong. Even though this material has been around for 2 years now, it seems like the finished version that Mulaney put out on Netflix just really nailed it. Every review I read was really strong. The Times writes, Mulaney's comedy has become spikier, pricklier, sometimes slower, while remaining as funny as ever, like he's a pitcher who learned how to mix up speeds. He's performed versions of this material throughout the last 2 years, and this special arrives on Netflix so meticulously honed that the polish doesn't even show. Mulaney's rat-a-tat delivery demanded you keep up with his thought process. It still does, but his cadence has become more intricate. The biggest laughs in this new special come from making the audience think they're ahead of him, placing an idea in their head, then slowing down to a pause or stammer to let it percolate. Rolling Stone said Mulaney, now 40 years old, sober and healthier looking. Spoilers about the actual material. Baby J opens with John Mulaney telling an anecdote about how his siblings persuaded him that he had been adopted as a child and his real mother was murdered by Miss America. Then he addresses the elephant in the room saying, you know what I mean, we were all quarantined, we all went to rehab and we got divorced and now our reputation is different. John talks about his intervention. He said, I was 2 hours late, so when I get there, everybody was madder at me. They were like, and you're late. And I was like, hey, if you wanted me here on time, you could have texted me, John, we have cocaine. I would have been a half hour early to help set up chairs. That's great. Mulaney tells a story about deciding to get a haircut at Saturday Night Live using his old ID. At 7 p.m., coked out of my mind, I went up to the 8th floor of 30 Rockefeller Center, walked into the Emmy Award-winning hair department. I said, hey, can I have a haircut? And they said, oh, John, you're not hosting this week. And I said, hey, can I have a haircut? You know that thing when a junkie walks in your office and asks for a haircut and you're like, it'd be faster to cut the hair? That's what happened. Mulaney then says that same day he purchased a $12,000 Rolex watch with a credit card and pawned it for $6,000 to buy drugs because he'd somehow overdrafted on Venmo. Then, armed with a new haircut and a backpack full of drugs, he found himself at the intervention, which he calls a We Are the World of Alternative Comics Over the Age of 40. With about a dozen people in the room and 6 zooming in from L.A., Mulaney said, I stroll in there, I'm cocaine skinny with a new haircut. They've all been in heavy quarantine for 9 months. They all look like crap. I was the best looking person at my intervention by a mile. Everyone there looked like Jerry Garcia. E.T. Online picked up on that thread. In the room, Fred Armisen, Nick Kroll, Seth Meyers, Bill Hader, Natasha Lyonne. Mulaney says, let me just call this out now. I don't mean to be weird. It was a star-studded intervention. It was like a good group. It was a good group. As mad as I was when I walked in there, I was like, oh, this is a good lineup. This is really flattering in its own way. It was like a We Are the World of Alternative Comedians Over the Age of 40. All comedians, yet no one said a funny thing the entire night. I was going psychotic. I'm sitting there in this awful chair, crashing from cocaine. No one will let me go to the bathroom to freshen up, and the funniest people are staring at me, refusing to do jokes. It was maddening. Fred Armisen was serious. Do you know how off-putting that is? Mulaney says, it's weird to be a recovering drug addict. It was weird to be a drug addict, but at least I was on drugs. I'm looking forward to watching that. I got to find some time. The Erie Comedy Festival begins tonight. Co-founder Anthony Morelli said, this is the inaugural festival. Obviously, we hope to make it yearly. They've planned a 4-day event with 25 to 30 performers, including 3 national headliners. Among your headliners, Learnmore Janasi, Zimbabwean stand-up comedian and actor. Brett Terhune and Kristen Becker. If you want to go, tonight at the Edinburgh Volunteer Fire Department on Meadville Street, there'll be an appetizer buffet before the show with Casey Kufdick. That all starts at 8 o'clock, $20. At 7:30 at the Room 33 Speakeasy. a showcase of comedians. I don't have the names for you. Tomorrow night at Calamari's Squid Row over on State Street. You know the place. Another showcase of comics, free, but reservations are requested. Learn More Janasi is your headliner on Friday night. Brett Terhune is the headliner Saturday. And on Sunday, Kristen Becker is your headliner at the 6:30 show at the Sheraton Erie Bayfront Hotel. $23 for preferred seating. Let's see what's going on at Sydney. I got to be honest with you. I got to figure out what day it is. I'm recording this on Wednesday. It's Thursday's episode. And for Australian comedy festivals, I always talk about the day before because of the way time zones work. So let's take a look at Friday. I got in very late last night. Some of the shows. Danny Boy, I know Danny Boy. His show's called Now Is a Good Time, and they've added a show. Ed Gamble from the UK is playing. Mel Buttle and Moses Storm are playing. We recently talked about them at the Melbourne Fest. Stephen K. Amos, he's fantastic. That's who I would go see. And here is something called The Bear Pack, which has two men in suits sitting next to a giant stuffed panda. And I'm curious, after a sold-out run at the Sydney Festival in 2022, The Bear Pack is back for one night. Join improv duo Steen Raskopoulos and Carlo Ricci, accompanied by Ange Lavapierre on the cello for 60 minutes of improvised storytelling inspired by the audience's suggestions. The Sydney Morning Herald called them Master Improvisers 5 stars. Hey, if you're in Sydney, they're at the Enmore on Friday night at 7:15. Reserve seating, $35 Australian. And that is your comedy news for today. Follow the show for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your shows. See you tomorrow. Can I interest you in some meatballs made out of mammoth meat? No? All right, hi, I'm Johnny Mack, host of 5 Good News Stories. It's a twice-a-week podcast where I share some upbeat stories like the dog who only will respond to commands if you use an Irish brogue. Or what about the guy who's filling potholes with noodles? Or the woman who, congratulations, she passed her driver's license. Oh, by the way, it was her 960th try. You heard me correctly. It's 5 Good News Stories. Nice, easy way to start your morning. 5 Good News Stories. The number 5 Good News Stories, wherever you get your podcasts.